Hello everyone, I'm Francis Walsh and welcome to the Personal Finance Diaries. Today we're going to be discussing post-purchase protection and looking at whether post-purchase protection is worth it and, the kinds of orders on which it makes the most sense. So if you shop online quite a bit and you use e-commerce retailers, you may have seen the option to add post-purchase protection. And this will be a little extra payment of like a couple of % of the value of your order that will allow you to have protection in the event that your item arrives damaged or it's not as described or there's some other issue with it. You can trigger this protection and ideally get a replacement or refund of your item. But so is it worth it? Is it worth paying this extra little bit of money? Does it all pan out in practice? What's the resolution process like? And overall, does it represent value for money? So let's dive into it. So a lot of the people I speak to about this will just reflexively avoid paying for things like this. They see it as an extra charge, it's not necessary, so they'll just skip it as a matter of course. Now that's fair enough. In some cases, I do think that there are certain situations in which it doesn't really represent value for money, but there are certain situations in which I think it does make sense. And there are a couple of different things to take into account here. The first one is if it's an expensive order. So if you're spending, multiple hundreds or even thousands of dollars on an item, it's going to be a big deal if something happens to that item in transit, then it can be worth paying for post-purchase protection, I think, because it's just such a big deal if something goes wrong. You want to have that extra layer of protection, and it just, even for your own peace of mind, it can really help in a situation like that. The next situation in which I think protection makes sense is if your item is breakable. So if you're getting something where, there's a good enough chance that it will suffer some proper damage on the way to your home, then I think that the extra few % for protection makes sense. So we're thinking here about things like electronics, expensive furniture, anything with like breakable parts that could just get banged in a truck or on the way up the front steps of your house. If the delivery man drops it too heavily, it becomes unusable for that reason. It's not always possible to get protection directly from the retailer in a situation like this. So if you do have that extra layer of protection from a third party, it can make a lot of sense. Another factor to take into account, and this is something that unfortunately has become quite common in an age when deliveries have also become much more common, but porch piracy. So there is now obviously a trend of thieves going around and looking for Amazon packages on doorsteps and all that kind of thing. And if you live in an area where this is common, or if you live in a kind of a housing situation where it's making it possible for thieves to do this kind of thing, then I think the extra protection makes sense. So example of this might be, say, if you live in an apartment block and you often get packages delivered to your apartment door, but there's a lot of foot traffic past your apartment door and you're not necessarily always there to collect packages straight away, then I think protection really makes sense in a situation like this, because it just gives you that peace of mind that if something does happen, that at least you'll be able to get your money back or to get a replacement on your item. Again, this is something you do kind of have to look to a third party for. Retailers aren't that good at compensating you in the event of porch piracy. So again, it's just that peace of mind, and it's just protection in case something does go wrong, if the likelihood of it going wrong is there. So then, when is post-purchase protection not worth it? Essentially, I suppose the first thing to think about here is the opposite of everything I've discussed already in the video. So if your item is relatively cheap, if it's not fragile, if it's not likely to get broken, and if you don't live in a situation where porch piracy is a big risk, so say your house is behind gates or whatever and delivery men come past the gates and drop it at your front door, then in any of those cases, you probably don't need to be paying for third-party protection. If you're ordering a new set of pillows for $40 and you live, behind a set of gates, you probably don't need to spend the extra money on the post-purchase protection. Another kind of more specific item to be aware of here is the fact that credit card companies can actually offer you some protection in this situation. So if you buy stuff online with a credit card and there's some issue with its delivery and the primary retailer isn't looking to, is not happy to compensate you for it, sometimes your credit card company may be in a position to get that money back for you. Now, this does depend on your card and on your company and on the specific situation, but if you are making purchases and wondering whether to avail of third-party cover, it can be worth just looking into your situation with your credit card to see if anything can be done in a situation like that. And so I suppose finally then a point to consider is what kind of third-party protection makes the most sense. You're not really going to get the option in practice to choose between providers, because what usually happens is is merchants will, have an arrangement with a given provider, and you will just have to use that. Some examples are Seel, Extend, Redo, and there's a few different ones. But like I said, you're not going to be picking between them. The merchant is going to make that choice for you. I know in Seel's case, they charge about 2% of your purchase price for worry-free delivery. So essentially, you're paying, if you get something worth $200, you pay $4, and then Seel will cover you in the event of, breakage in transit, failed delivery, packages going missing, all of that kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, I think 2%, if it's, like I said, if it's a breakable purchase, if it's a big money spend, and if you're at risk of porch piracy, I think that 2% does kind of make sense in a lot of cases. So in summation then, is it worth paying for post-purchase protection? The answer really is, it depends. If it's an expensive purchase, if you're at risk of porch piracy, if there's a risk that your item is going to be broken and unusable by the time it reaches your front door, then yes, I think pay for it. If it's something like soft furnishings or something that's cheap, or you're not worried about it getting stolen, then, maybe not. But yeah, that's pretty much all from me on this topic. Thanks for hanging out with me here on the Personal Finance Diaries. If you found this useful, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.